Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for attending tonight. Our format for tonight's debate is simple. Our speakers, who have been divided into two teams, will each make their 7-minute opening statement, free from audience interference. Once their opening statements have all been made, the format opens, allowing a direct engagement with the other speakers, howsoever they wish, be it through cross-examination or rebuttal. During this period, as an audience member, you may raise an objection, but if the speaker does not welcome your input, you will need to cease interference. Our speakers tonight are Charlie Webb and Adam Meehan. Now, without further ado, I hereby welcome to the front Charlie for his opening statement, dissenting from the title, The Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill 2024-25 has no place in Great Britain.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Charlie Webb, and I appear in this debate as sole counsel on behalf of the party affirming the implementation of the End-of-Life Bill 2024. During the course of my submissions this evening, I will be addressing the audience on a number of considerations, which we say demonstrate exactly why the positive impacts of the implementation of this bill heavily outweigh any negative ramifications. I begin my opening statement this evening with the emotive real-life tale of Mark Crampton, which was recently put before the House of Commons by a Conservative Member of Parliament. To quote, "Mark's COPD became too much for him, and so he informed his family that he was going to take his own life. He took his oxygen tank and mask, and late one night went and sat on a railway embankment. He wanted a death that was instant and quick, that he could rely upon, and he waited until 2 in the morning. Heartbreakingly, he had worked out when the last train was going to run, so he would minimize disruption to the public. And he took his own life in lonely circumstances in the middle of the night." Members of the audience, the reason for this debate tonight is to prevent people like Mark from having to experience the pain and agony of dying in such brutal circumstances away from their families. Please consider not only the way that Mark's family would have felt by his desperate decision to end his own life in such a fashion, but also the feelings of everyone else involved on that night. The train driver, the emergency services who responded to the scene, and any passengers on that train whose lives may be permanently affected by the scarring images of that fateful night. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the reality of the situation that terminally ill people face without any available protection of assisted dying in England and Wales. Why is it that somebody who is in such genuine pain, nearing the end of their life, should have to take the decision to end their life in a way that causes so much agony to themselves and to others? This debate is focused on the ability for people to pass away with dignity in the most comfortable and pain-free environment possible, surrounded by those whom they love the most. I'd like members of the audience to consider the elements of personal autonomy and freedom of choice which accompany the proposed legislation. Safeguards are clearly implemented within this bill, requiring that the person who wishes to die has a sufficient mental capacity to make that choice, and that they have expressed a clear, settled, and informed wish, free from coercion or pressure to end their own life. Members of the audience, this legislation respects an individual's right to choose when to die, all whilst ensuring that terminally ill people are protected from coercion or external pressures, ensuring that the freedom of choice remains firmly with the unwell person and no one else. Members of the audience, there are also stringent eligibility requirements contained within the proposed bill. This means that 2 independent doctors must be satisfied that a person's life expectancy is shorter than 6 months, as well as the requirement for the approval of a High Court judge before any type of treatment can take place. The bill goes further to make it a criminal offence to pressure, coerce, or use dishonesty to get someone to make a declaration that they wish to end their own life, or to induce someone to self-administer an approved substance. If someone were to be found guilty of either of these offences, they could face up to 14 years in prison, once again providing a safeguard in case of any concerns of legislative abuse. I now return to the example of Mark Crampton. Members of the audience, do you genuinely believe that if we choose to deny the right to assisted dying, that people who are in such desperate circumstances will simply accept their fate and refrain from seeking other methods to end their own life? I believe that instead they will choose to take their lives in more painful, horrific ways. Please also consider that these other horrific methods are not always effective, only escalating the pain and agony for the victims and their loved ones during their final days. And so why is it that we as human beings should be denied the opportunity to decide when our lives should come to an end in the most peaceful manner possible? Ladies and gentlemen, my learned friend for the opposition may wish to suggest that there is a moral duty to preserve life at all costs. But I would ask you to consider whether preserving life in circumstances where unbearable suffering is the only future that remains truly aligns with our societal values of compassion and humanity. I would also suggest that this bill is not about ending lives. It is about ending suffering. It is about giving the people who are already facing the inevitability of death the ability to control how and when they face it. It is about affording them dignity at a time where illness threatens to strip them of it entirely. I'd also ask you to consider the families of the terminally ill individuals. Without this legislation, many families are forced to watch their loved ones endure prolonged pain and suffering, feeling helpless as they witness the slow erosion of the person whom they love. Passing this bill would not only give terminally ill people the option of a dignified death, but it would also spare their families the anguish of seeing them suffer unnecessarily. If we truly analyse the implications of assisted dying on a global scale, in jurisdictions such as Belgium, Canada, and the Netherlands, where assisted dying is already legal, there is no evidence of any systemic abuse of the law. In fact, data from these regions shows that assisted dying accounts for only a small percentage of the overall deaths, underscoring its use as a last resort only. Take Canada, for instance. Over 87% of those who request medical assistance in dying do so to maintain control over their lives and to avoid unbearable suffering. This is not about a desire to die. It is about a desire to live the final moments of your life on the terms of yourself, free from agony. If we are to call ourselves a compassionate society, we must prove that. We must extend that compassion to those who need it the most. To deny terminally ill people the ability to end their suffering on their terms is to ignore their pain and humanity. This bill does not diminish the value of human life. Instead, it affirms it. It affirms that life is precious and that each person should have the right to live and die with dignity. By passing this bill, Great Britain would join other progressive nations in recognizing that offering a choice in death is an act of compassion, not an act of harm. Ladies and gentlemen, I end my closing address to you this evening by asking you to reflect on this. People are not seeking death. They are seeking peace. And when the end of life becomes inevitable, and when suffering is unavoidable, why should we deny them the peace and dignity that they desire and deserve? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your opening statement. I now welcome Adam Forth to the front to make his opening statement.
Thank you, Charlie, for that very well-spoken speech. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Mian, and I rise today to speak against the terminally ill end-of-life bill. This legislation, though presented with compassionate intentions, has no place in Great Britain. It introduces risks that will profoundly and negatively alter the principles and practices that underpin our society and our healthcare system today. Currently, assisted suicide and suicide are not criminal offences in themselves. However, under Section 2, Line 1 of the Suicide Act 1961, it is an offence in England and Wales to intentionally encourage or assist the suicide of another person. This existing framework strikes a balance between compassion and the protection of vulnerable individuals. I will now shed light on the deeply concerning flaws of this bill. My deep moral convictions of the sanctity of human life are the main reasons why I oppose this bill. The ethical cornerstone of our society is the idea that all lives are sacred and deserving of respect, regardless of their circumstances. This bill runs the risk of conveying a harmful message that some lives are less valuable than others by making assisted dying legal. In 1969, Parliament voted to abolish the death penalty for murder. Public opinion was against this. However, MPs agreed on one point of principle. The state should not be involved in taking the life of another human being. We must uphold this principle and reject the notion that the state should facilitate death. Also, the process of this bill is fundamentally defective. Initially, the patient has a conversation with a medical practitioner who is not required to be a doctor. The practitioner checks if they are terminally ill, if they have the mental capacity, and if they have been coerced or pressured. This initial interaction plants the seed of assisted dying, introducing a path patients may feel compelled to follow. The term terminally ill is of great elasticity, almost to the point of meaningless. It is impossible for doctors to predict if death is certain within 6 months. Doctors determine whether death is reasonably expected, not that death is reasonably certain. Furthermore, 6 months is a completely arbitrary number and is medically unreliable. Coercion is often subtle and often invisible. Medical professionals cannot see or hear everything that influences a patient's decision. However, the biggest danger isn't other people pressuring patients, it's patients pressuring themselves. The elderly, especially those paying thousands to live in the care homes, may feel like they're a financial and emotional burden on their families. This bill risks making them think that choosing to die is the selfless option, even if they've been subtly pressured by their circumstances or internal guilt. How can we be sure that a person facing such immense physical and emotional suffering is in the right frame of mind to make such a tough decision? Clause 15, subsection 5 of the bill allows a proxy to sign for the patient, either a person who has known them for at least 2 years or someone of good standing in the community. This second part is alarmingly inadequate, essentially meaning anyone can sign off for them. Once the assessment has been signed off, the bill assumes judges will verify this criteria. The bill presumes judges will take on an investigator role, which is completely unheard of, and even if the test was applied properly, it would overwhelm family courts. Judges are not required to even meet applicants and will most likely communicate via email or phone call. Likewise, partially lifting the ban on assisted suicide for a distinct group risks claims of discrimination from those excluded. This opens a slippery slope to expansion, as seen in other jurisdictions, such as Belgium. The vague definitions within the bill and the arbitrary 6 months prognosis add further ambiguity. The bill risks reshaping our society's values. It implies that human worth is tied to utility, that people are valuable only so long as they are not a burden or cost. This mindset is fundamentally at odds with the principle of inclusion and equality that define Great Britain. There is no requirement for applicants to inform their families, friends, or even their GP of the decision that they're making. The NHS and the judicial system could operate in complete secrecy, facilitating the death of loved ones without the knowledge of those closest to them. This is an abomination to the transparency and trust of which our healthcare system depends on. The passing of the bill argues that it offers the choice. Yet introducing this option risks diverting resources and attention from palliative care. Real choice would mean universal access to high-quality end-of-life care, not the normalization of assisted suicide. By focusing on ending life, the bill narrows options for those who wish to live with dignity, even in suffering, and adds more pressure to go down this path. This bill will not simply offer an option to a few. It will impose a new reality on all. It will alter the way we perceive life and death, creating a society less compassionate, less protective of the vulnerable, and less invested in care. We must not allow desperation to dictate legislation. Let us focus instead on improving palliative care, supporting families, and affirming the values of every life. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening statement. The debate now opens into our second phase, in which speakers are welcomed to cross-examine each other howsoever they choose.
So I'd just like to bring up the point of 6 months. Why was that number chosen as the number of life expected to live?
I don't know specifically why 6 months was chosen, but I would say that 6 months is quite a reasonable time frame, because you've got to remember that this bill, the aim of this bill is to stop suffering, and in most cases, people with 6 months left, that's going to be the time where they're going to be beginning to suffer the most. I think if it was to be a higher number, you'd have the chance of, as you've said during your submissions, it's hard to predict. It's hard to predict when someone might die. So a number like, say, for example, 3 years, someone could be given 3 years to live and live for 10 years, whereas I think 6 months is a far more realistic number. And yeah, it's when they're going to be going through the most pain, I would say.
But also someone could be given 6 months to live and live on for another 5 years. What if they ended up going down the assisted suicide route and not living the rest of their life?
Absolutely, I appreciate that. I think the thing to remember, though, again, is that people are going down the route of assisted suicide because they're suffering that pain. And it's the fact that they want to have that choice to be able to take their life in a comfortable environment when that pain begins. And so someone might be given 6 months, and after 3 months they feel fine, and therefore they don't go down the assisted suicide route. This is very much for people who the pain is beginning, it's agonizing, and therefore they realize, okay, my life's coming to an end. I want to do it on my own terms, how I feel comfortable at home, rather than in a hospital bed in 3 months' time where I lose all of my dignity.
Okay, but you say people are suffering. Why don't we try improve palliative care and reduce people's sufferings and make their end of life come naturally, but also like as best as it can endure?
I certainly take that on board, that improvements could be made to palliative care, but I don't think that has to be something that has to be done on its own. I think they can work together. It provides an option. So, for example, if we could improve palliative care whilst also implementing the bill, it provides the option where perhaps some people want to live for as long as they possibly can, and the services in palliative care will provide that. Perhaps some people don't want to go through palliative care because whilst the services might be great, they're going through a lot of pain. Their family are having to see them go through a lot of pain. So I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think they can work together.
So do you agree that introducing this bill will reduce funding to palliative care and focus it more on assisted dying and make that the more preferred route of terminally ill people?
I think if it were to be made to be the preferred route, there would be a simple reason for that, and that is because it should be implemented, and it would be the preferred route because it would be a good route for people who are experiencing that pain. I think it doesn't take anything away from palliative care, and a lot of people might want to live for as long as they possibly can. But I know that especially elderly people who have had a long life might feel that they'd rather die with that dignity and not in pain, rather than going down the route of palliative care. And I take on board what you've said about, of course, palliative care costs money, and there's pressures to that, but I think it's very much providing two options, so that it's not you haven't got to go down one route or the other.
What about the elderly people in care homes that have become terminally ill and now feel like a burden on their family and feel like they need to take their own life to relieve their family of seeing them and being a financial burden and cost to them instead of being their loving member of family?
I very much take that on board, and I can see why that would be a concern, which is why it's extremely important that these safeguards are in place, why it has to be the case that, I can't remember the exact wording, but someone must be sure that they are certain that they want to do it, and why the High Court judge has to sign it off. And of course he's a professional, legal professional, who I would hope would take steps to making sure that it was the actual person's wishes rather than any coercion.
Absolutely, but first point is, how would you even be able to tell if coercion has taken place?
I think effectively it's about meeting that person. Of course, two doctors meet that person. They're able to form an opinion of that. I think there will always be uncertainty with things, but I think in a situation like this, where it's such an important issue of such gravity, I think it can be very clear that what a person's wishes are.
Yeah, so if this bill does come into, because right now there's no bill like this, so I feel like there's no pressure, there's no choice to go down this assisted dying route. If this bill comes into as law, then there would be that added pressure to take your own life if you're terminally ill.
I take that on board, but you can look at the counter argument and say that whilst at the minute there's no pressure, there's also no option for people who actually want to end their own life, and that is the problem. Effectively, because there's no other alternative at the minute, people who are going through that suffering and that pain will have to end their own life in a much worse way. They might have to do, as Mark did, something horrific or something that doesn't always bring about the correct result, and that puts them and their family through a lot more pain.
Absolutely. My deepest sympathies for Mark and his family. But did he go through any palliative care? Did he have any pain relief? Or
So he had COPD, and of course he was wearing a breathing mask and taking oxygen and stuff, and he was coming towards the end of his life. But that's a condition that was never going to improve from where he was at. And I think that's the reality of what people face. I think palliative care is, of course, extremely helpful, and a lot of people need it, but it's the position where ultimately these people know they're going to pass away, and they either have the option of passing away. As things stand, they have no option. They pass away, and they know they're going to be in pain, whereas they might want the option of passing away at peace, which is the situation they might currently face.
yeah, but to me it just sounds like palliative care has failed him. He was in too much suffering that he had to go to this drastic measure. Do you think if palliative care had reduced his suffering enough and made his last days, weeks as best as possible, that he wouldn't have to have taken his own life?
I think that, unfortunately, with a lot of conditions, with obviously COPD and conditions like cancer and things like that, there's only a certain extent that modern medicine can actually help. You're always going to be going through some pain. A lot of people are given a lot of painkillers, but eventually you just become immune to it, and it just doesn't work in the way that you want it to. And you do go through some serious agony, which is why, of course, he had to take such a drastic measure. And we don't want that to take place because, of course, you've got to think of the other people involved, the train driver, or if he'd have taken his life in another situation, maybe his family would have found him. Of course, we want people to be able to die with dignity, in a place where they feel comfortable, and that is not going to be, of course, on the train tracks like Mark. I'll ask of you, what would you say to the suggestion that if we don't bring in the bill here to make people feel comfortable ending their lives in this country, they might just go abroad and do it?
I feel like the abroad option is a valid option for the select few that can afford to do it and really need to take it. But I feel like if we make it more accessible here, the numbers will go up and the real problems are not being addressed.
So, of course, you touch upon the fact that perhaps some people might not be able to afford to go abroad and end their own life. Do you think then that maybe, as things stand, we're gatekeeping it? We're only allowing those who've got the money to go abroad and be at peace and die happily as possible, and yet the people maybe from lower income have to stay over here and suffer?
Yeah, so I think if someone has jumped to that conclusion that they need to fly abroad and spend this much money to take their own life, then we have failed them as a society. Our resources have not helped them enough. Our palliative care has not been up to standard. So I think that should be our main priority in fixing it, having the most state-of-the-art palliative care facility where people won't need to take their own lives with assisted suicide.
Also, early in your opening, you said that all lives are deserving of respect. What would you say to the suggestion that you are not respecting a person's wishes by not allowing them to take their own life when they want to?
So, I mean, there are lots of laws that do not respect people's choices, like hard drugs are illegal. We don't let people choose to take them. People obviously do, but not legally. So, yeah.
But is it not that you can respect a person's life whilst also allowing them their wishes to die.
Okay, so say the bill goes through and only terminally ill people are allowed to commit assisted suicide. What is the argument then when disabled people want to go through assisted suicide and they say the law is discriminatory because they're not including disabled people or different type of people?
Well, the reason that those sort of people wouldn't be included is because we're trying to implement as many safeguards as possible. Obviously, you've got the 6 months terminally ill. I agree that it would be open to abuse without those safeguards, but it's one of the reasons they're there, is to make sure that this law is firm and consistent and applied in a way that cannot be abused in any way.
But what if the person who's not terminally ill is suffering really hard as well?
I mean, as you've said, there are other options in terms of Belgium and elsewhere where such safeguards don't exist, but the law has to draw a line somewhere, and without it, it would be open to abuse.
Yeah, so Belgium's jurisdiction or legislation actually expanded after it was released. What is stopping that from happening here, or what's not stopping that from happening here as well, in further on down the line, 10, 20 years later, since laws do change frequently?
I mean, there's nothing specifically stopping it from changing, but British values, I mean, would probably dictate that that sort of thing wouldn't happen. I'm sure there'll be a lot of outcry for that sort of thing taking place.
But you can never be certain that it won't happen.
If it did, there would have to be a parliamentary vote on it, I'm sure, and that would mean there'll be some reason for it to take place. So I don't think we need to worry about what can come of the law. It's more making sure the safeguards are there.
I'd like to talk about the judge's role in this. So what is it that the judge does after the two doctors have approved of the application?
To my understanding, the judge hears the evidence and has to effectively just sign off so that this person is able to receive the procedure.
So there's no investigation, no meeting with the applicant, anything like that?
I can't be certain on any investigation or meeting, but of course the judge is a legal professional and he'll be dealing with a lot of cases like this, and he'll also be acting on the advice of two doctors who've also signed it off, who are also of course medical professionals who've got their ethics and stuff. So I don't think there should be too much concern about the judge getting things wrong. By that stage, by the stage it gets to the judge, it will have been through a lot of people, and the intentions of the person will have to be fairly clear.
Well, not a lot of people. It would have been through two independent medical practitioners.
Yes, but it would have also they have to have two signed declarations by the person who wishes to take their own life. Their mental capacity must have been checked. The two doctors must...
How would you check for mental capacity?
I mean, I'm not a medical professional personally, but in many areas of living, we have to check people's mental capacities.
But don't you think in that stage of life they're in that suffering, that torment would have taken over their mindset and they just want the pain and suffering to end, so they'd make rash decisions like going through with assisted dying?
And I think that's why it's important for the doctors and the people to decide whether this is a settled and informed decision that they've made, hence having to make two different declarations, just to ensure that this is actually the person's wishes rather than something they've made a rash decision on, because of course I'm sure our legal system wouldn't let that take place, someone just to say they'd want it to happen. It's not as if it's going to happen on that day as such.
Yeah.
In terms of, what about people who are in genuine pain though? If someone's in genuine suffering and the palliative care isn't working, how can you sit there and say, we have no other options?
Look, part of life is suffering. You're never going to get rid of suffering. It's an emotion, it's a feeling that everyone goes through. And just because someone's suffering doesn't mean they should take their own life. If palliative care has failed them, that's the problem. That's what we should invest resources, money in, trying to improve it. And there are flaws in this bill, but one point I'd just like to shine light on is there's no requirement for applicants to inform their families, friends, close ones, or even their GP. The NHS and the judicial system could operate in complete secrecy. What's the reason behind that?
I mean, ultimately, it goes back to your point of potential coercion and things. I mean, you could say that that makes it a lot easier because it's the person's own informed decision rather than having to talk to their family about it.
Don't you think their family and loved ones deserve to know what decision they're making?
At the end of the day, it's their own decision, it's the person's own body. I feel like there could be a worry that their family members might try and talk them out of it. Their family don't know the exact pain they're going through. They can see it happening, but they can't feel what they're feeling. And I know personally that, like, everyone would probably expect their family members to say, no, like, we want you for longer. But it's got to be a person's own decision. And I think that that's crucial, that if you don't want to tell family, you don't have to. Some people might not be close to their family. Some people might have never been to their GP. I think it's the position that this should be a person's own decision. And as long as they're informed by a doctor, then no one else's external pressures should be able to get to them, whether that is to make them want to take their own life or make them not want to.
Yeah, this right now is not a possibility, but if this bill does pass, then this will be a possibility. And I don't think people's loved ones, those who are closest to them, deserve to lose their loved ones secretly. And I really feel like that's a big flaw in the bill.
I feel as though if they're that close to their loved ones, then it's not going to be a secret. And if they're not, then there's a reason for that. And those people should not be able to influence a person's decision, especially at a time where they're going through so much pain. You've got to remember that these people have been told that they've got 6 months to live or less. So if their family don't know about that, then there's probably going to be a reason for it. And if their family don't know about their wish to die and they don't tell their family about their wish to die, then there's probably also going to be a reason for that. We must respect people's freedom of choice and their choice alone. I think this bill, one of the concerns about it is that people are going to be influenced, and it's really important that there's no such influence taking place.
What about the death penalty? That was abolished in 1969, and the reason for that was because MPs have a principle that the state should not be taking people's lives. And also we do have strict abortion laws too. So we recognise that human life is valuable. So why should we now, just because someone isn't like useful or so-called valuable, why should we assist their dying?
I mean, with regards to the death penalty, that relates to miscarriages of justice and the fact that potentially we might be executing people who are innocent. And of course, we don't want to do that. Here, we are sure that the person has a free choice and that it's their choice that they want to end their own life. And of course, it's in much different circumstances. And then sort of when you compare it to abortion laws, of course, abortions are legal in the UK. And again, that's the reason for that is respecting people's choice and respecting, I suppose, the principle of people might get an abortion because they don't feel ready to bring another human life in. And it's similar in that you don't feel that you want to continue with your life because you're in such pain. So it's about respecting that freedom of choice.
But say it's 6 months into the pregnancy now and the person chooses not to have the child. They don't have the freedom of choice there to abort it.
I mean, again, that's a medical issue more than anything, in terms of like safety of a female and the development of the child. But what we're talking about is a person who can be put to sleep in a peaceful way, just as you do with an animal, if an animal was unwell, and who is going to die anyway, respecting their choice, respecting the fact that they want to die on their own terms.
So you're saying terminally ill people should be put down like animals?
I'm saying that the choice should be theirs and theirs alone. They should be left with that choice rather than having to go through such agony. If you listen to people outside Parliament who are going through such pain, it's clear that to have that choice there, it's not as if they have to take that choice, but to be able to have it there is a much greater thing than it not to be there at all.
Yeah, I think if this bill does come in, though, the choice, the option of having a choice is a myth. It's not like you can go down the palliative care route and not die. It's you're suffering, you're terminally ill. Oh, assisted dying's an option. I'm such a burden on my family. I'm costing them so much. I'm costing them so much pain. Let me go down it. If this bill wasn't legal, yeah, if it wasn't law, then this wouldn't happen. But I feel like once it comes, the choice is a myth, and that feels like the path many terminally ill people will want to go down.
I think in terms of the pressures, it's definitely why safeguards need to be implemented and people's roles need to be taken seriously. The role of the judge, the role of the medical professionals involved, determining that a person's view is settled and their own and it's informed. But I do genuinely believe that a person will take their own life because they feel that that is the option for them in the pain that they are suffering, rather than any monetary incentive or anything of that such.
I feel like the safeguards are quite flawed, hence the reason you can't test for someone's mental capacity accurately. You can't know 100% for certain if coercion has taken place. So I think this uncertainty in the process of this bill is defective and could lead to executing people who have been coerced into taking this decision.
I think the thing to remember is that we're dealing with people who are professionals and who have taken oaths to do their job properly, doctors who've taken oaths to do their job properly. This is not going to be one in, one out. This is going to be dealt with in a way that's sensitive and that is correct. And that's the thing to remember about this act.
Absolutely, but the fact that you can't know for certain if coercion has happened or if the person has the mental capacity to make this decision makes it flawed safeguarding.
But ultimately, nothing is certain. Nothing.
Then why should we pass this bill? Then we need to assist dying with people who are absolutely certain with the choice.
But that's something that you could always say is questionable, whether anything is certain. You've just got to trust in the professionals that are doing their job, that they can make a choice on that certainty. It's the same with, think of a criminal trial. You're trusting in 12 members of the jury. They might get it wrong, but that's the best possible process.
Absolutely.
And that's what provides the solace to these people.
Life is valuable. We're not doing a little trial. This is talking about someone's life. Someone's, one day they're living, one day they're not. And I feel like the only way to know for certain if someone would want to go through with assisted dying is if they fly to another country and get it done there. I don't think there's a way for this to run in this country here.
I think to leave that on the table is, the problem is you're just putting people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds in the position where they have to feel the pain, and yet people who might be from more wealthy backgrounds, they can go to Belgium and have the assisted dying. So again, you're looking at that.
There are ways to raise capital, crowdfunding as well, if someone's absolutely certain in this, but I think our resources should be put into improving our palliative care sector. But
do you agree that as much as palliative care is good, it can't possibly stop all pain that someone is suffering?
Absolutely, but nothing can.
So why should those people have to go through the pain if they don't want to?
Because you can't really control it.
But you can control it with assisted dying.
I wouldn't say that's controlling it. I would say that's just part of the problem.
You can deal with the pain that someone's suffering, which could be excruciating. They could have had the medication, the maximum dosage, and still be going through serious pain. That's not any criticism of the palliative care. That's how medicine works. They could have been through all that pain, and the only way that they can get through that pain in the final few months of their life is to die with dignity through assisted dying.
Absolutely, but I just feel like this bill is flawed as well. It's not been thought out as well as it should have. There's flaws in the safeguarding and in the process, and it wouldn't work as well as it's thought out to be here in this country.
So, what would your position be if someone close to you was seriously unwell and they wanted to pass away, would you say to them, okay, palliative care, or would you rather have a situation of assisted dying?
I mean, that would be their choice, but I'd do my best to comfort them and try relieve them of as much suffering as I could.
But you'd agree that they would still be suffering to some extent?
Yeah, if someone's terminally ill, they probably will be suffering.
I thank our speakers for coming tonight, for their opening statements and for their excellent cross-examinations. We will now take a vote after a minute of consideration by raising of hands as to who won in their argument of tonight's title. Those in favour of the bill passing, please raise your hand. Those in favour of the bill not passing, please raise your hand. By a majority, Adam has succeeded in affirming the title tonight. Congratulations.